Today's story is a scary example of how a senseless, brutal attack can unfold and how trust in those closest to you can be shattered in an instant. This is the story of a group of college students who never imagined their peaceful summer would end in a nightmare. The main characters in our story were students at a local college in Peoria, Illinois. Tom Smith was a third-year student, and his fiancée, Jennifer Logsdon, had just finished her first year at the same college. Jennifer got tired of the dormitory life with its constant parties and chaos. Looking for a quieter place to study, she decided to move in with Tom. They were joined by Jennifer's old friend Casey, who also enrolled at the college that year. The three rented a small house together, pooling their resources to live more peacefully, away from the hustle and bustle of campus life. Everything seemed normal until the evening of July 19, 1991, when the lives of these three young people were forever changed. Tom, 20, and Jennifer, 19, were planning their wedding, hoping to build a future together. They were taking a much-needed break from their busy lives, spending the weekend with Casey, their 17-year-old roommate. The three of them decided to watch a horror movie together, a Stephen King classic. They made a bed on the floor with some snacks and settled in for a casual evening. Nothing about that night suggested the horrors that would soon begin. When movie ended, Jennifer fell asleep, followed by Tom. Casey went to bed in another room, but in the middle of the night, Jennifer was suddenly woken up by a terrifying scream. Through the darkness, she saw Tom struggling with a man, a tall, strong African-American man with wild eyes and a knife in hand. Even being severely overpowered, Tom fought back very bravely, trying to protect Jennifer. The attacker continued to stab him with strong force. Jennifer, paralyzed by fear, could barely move. Through the chaos, Jennifer noticed something odd about the attacker. His socks were in his hands and his feet were bare. She realized that Tom was losing strength, and even though he still tried, he was becoming weaker. The attacker, definitely intent on finishing what he started, moved toward Jennifer. She fought back as best she could, even managing to wrest the knife from his grip at one point, but the fight left her seriously wounded. The attacker wasn't finished. With the knife still in hand, he lunged at Jennifer again, landing a fatal blow to her throat. As Jennifer lost consciousness, Casey, who had been asleep in another room, heard the noise. She called 911, but due to poor phone reception, the dispatcher failed to understand the urgency of the situation. The attacker, hearing the noise, brushed into Casey's room, knocking down the door. In a state of rage, he attacked Casey next. She fought back as best as she could, but the man was far too strong. The fight was brutal. The knife blade bent and eventually broke off from the handle. In a final act of violence, the attacker grabbed the broken knife blade from the floor and left the house. Casey, despite being badly injured, managed to call for help once more, and this time, the emergency services understood the gravity of the situation. Around 3 a.m., the police arrived at the house to find a scene of horrific violence. Blood was everywhere. Items were all over the house, showing signs of a strong struggle. In the center of it all, Tom lay unconscious in a pool of his blood, covered in stab wounds. Despite the brutality of the attack, both Jennifer and Casey were still alive, though critically injured. Jennifer, weak and fading, told paramedics that she knew she was dying, but begged them to save Tom and Casey. By the time they arrived, Tom had lost so much blood that he was already unconscious and pale. He died shortly after the paramedics arrived on the scene. The doctors and medical team worked hard to save the girls, and though they were both one step from death, they survived. Jennifer was left with deep stab wounds, a punctured lung, and a slashed throat. Casey had been stabbed several times and suffered significant blood loss as well, but both girls managed to pull through with the help of long-term recovery. As the investigation into the attack began, the police had few clues to work with. Both Jennifer and Casey could only describe the attacker as a tall, dark-skinned man, But there was one detail they both remembered: his socks. The man had worn socks on his hands, possibly to avoid leaving fingerprints. However, his bare feet left many footprints around the house, a clue that would eventually lead the police to their suspect. The investigation quickly pointed to Gene Brown, a 27-year-old neighbor who lived across the street. Police discovered bloodstains on a mosquito net at his home, and further evidence, including a footprint matching his, led them to suspect him. When he was confronted, Brown claimed that he had accidentally cut himself in the kitchen, but the story didn't hold very well. After some investigation, it became clear that Brown had broken into the house to rob the students, but his true motives were darker. He admitted to attacking Tom first, and when he fought back, Brown lost control. He then attacked Jennifer and Casey, planning to kill everyone in the house to cover his tracks. However, Tom's brave resistance exhausted him, and he was unable to make fatal injuries quickly enough. It was Tom's struggle that ultimately saved the girls' lives. The case against Brown seemed to grow. He had been caught in his lies, and the evidence against him was overwhelming. However, he still refused to explain why he had targeted these particular students. Investigators believed his true intent was to assault the girls, and Tom's defense of Jennifer had been what led to his brutal death. While Jennifer and Casey struggled to recover from their physical wounds, the emotional toll of that night would stay with them forever. The crime scene showed the extreme violence they had to fight, and their near-death experience haunted them for years after. The community, too, was shaken. Neighbors had heard nothing, despite the screams, and many were left questioning how such a brutal crime could have happened so close to home. Brown's testimony was inconsistent throughout the investigation. At one point he claimed that he had been attacked by Tom with a knife and that he had only acted in self-defense. At other times he retracted his earlier admissions, insisting that he did not remember the attack at all. The prosecution presented strong evidence, including bloodstains from all three victims found on his clothes and fingerprints on the murder weapon. Brown also failed to account for the presence of the knife in his possession, which had been lost during the altercation but still bore his prints. Brown eventually pled guilty to the murder of Tomi and the attempted murder of the two young women. He managed to avoid the death penalty by pleading guilty and expressing remorse for his actions. Brown stated that he would have never committed the crime had he known how destructive his drug addiction would be, but his apology did little to ease the pain of the victims or their families. Despite his plea for mercy, the surviving women and Tomi's family found no comfort in his remorse. The women, scarred physically and emotionally by the attack, could never fully accept his apology. They felt that he should have been executed for the crime, and though Brown avoided the death penalty, he was sentenced to life in prison. He also received additional years for the attempted murders and burglary. In the aftermath, Tomi's mother, who had lost her only son in the attack, expressed a surprising empathy. Despite the immense pain she was experiencing, she chose not to seek the death penalty for Brown, seemingly moved by the idea that another mother might one day face the same kind of grief she had. However, her decision did not sway the victims, who vowed to prevent any attempts to release Brown from prison in the future. Brown is still serving his life sentence at the Illinois Correctional Center. The two young women have continued with their lives, though the scars, both physical and emotional, remain. Jennifer, one of the survivors, struggled with the grief of losing Tomi, but after many years she began to heal. However, the apology from Brown never felt genuine to her or the other victim. They both continue to fight for justice, ensuring that Brown will never walk free again. The case serves as a strong reminder of the destructive power of drugs and violence, and of the lasting impact such crimes have on victims and their families. Brown's actions were senseless and brutal, and his defense was undermined by the sheer volume of incriminating evidence. His story is one of remorse, but it also reflects the irreversible damage done by his choices that took the life of an innocent young man and forever change the lives of those who survived. Thank you for watching.